Hi, and welcome to the Fintech Times Presents series of webinars. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on all the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. So, firstly, I'd like to say hello to our online audience. Thank you very much for joining us. Today, we're going to be discussing the effect of COVID-19 on marketplaces. So what we'd really like you to do is follow the conversation using the hashtag Fintech Times Marketplaces, and obviously really great if you could follow us at the Fintech Times. We'll start by understanding what a marketplace is, how physical and digital marketplaces have been affected by the pandemic, and what the future may hold. We'll be inviting questions for the audience, so be sure to use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screens to put your questions to the panel. Unfortunately, if you are joining us with a phone, this may not be available, so apologies for that. We have a great panel of industry experts and thought leaders, so I'm going to invite them all to join me on screen, and we're going to probably start with some introductions. So, Adam, perhaps you could give us a little bit of who you are, where you're from, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Adam Bialy. I'm the Chief Product Officer at OpenPaid. I'm in charge of growth and strategy and kind of product development and innovation at OpenPaid. OpenPaid is a banking as a service API first provider servicing, among others, marketplaces and trying to solve really complex problems around pay in, pay out, collection of funds and payout scenarios for marketplaces, among others. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, fantastic. And also we have David. Perhaps you give us a quick overview of yourself and where you're from.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm David Keane. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Funding Options. Funding Options is a marketplace for small and independent businesses to find lending and other services.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And last but not least, our last panelist, Stephen. Perhaps similarly, give us a bit of an intro and an overview.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, I'm Steve Dukes, and I'm COO at Confused.com. We help consumers choose the right insurance, the right energy deal, the right finance, and we save them time and money in the process.
Fantastic. Right. Thank you very much for giving up your time to join us and have a chat today. What I thought we'd probably start with was just a little bit of what a marketplace sort of means to you and where it was kind of born. Not sort of war and peace, because we want to get onto the meat of the conversation, but David, maybe your initial sort of thoughts, what's a marketplace?
So a marketplace can mean many things, but if we look historically at where marketplaces come from, there's been marketplaces around as long as there's been people around. People have always wanted to bring stuff and services together so people can choose them. To me, the core of marketplaces is the ability for people to figure out what they want to buy, how they want to source it, and what the best options are for them. So it's something that provides liquidity and really oils the wheels of capitalism.
Okay, interesting. Steve, maybe you could go next. Give us a bit of an overview of what you think and maybe where it was born.
Sure. So Confused.com was the first car insurance comparison marketplace in the UK. And so created that category, and that marketplace has formed the model for other financial services marketplaces since. We recently celebrated our 18th birthday, which makes us quite grown up for a fintech. In that time, although what we offer and how we offer it has evolved quite significantly, our purpose, the purpose of our marketplace has remained the same, which is about empowering our customers to choose better.
Okay, interesting. And Adam, from yourself, what do you see as a marketplace, and sort of when was the rise of the marketplace effectively?
Yeah, I think I agree with the guys there. It's all those things, but it's also from my perspective as being the payments geek here, it is, I call it the ABC model, where money flows from the buyer or the consumer to the marketplace, and then to the merchants or sellers that operate on the marketplace. I think the first truly digital marketplace that started it all and started this sort of marketplace revolution of sorts was eBay. But nowadays, when I think marketplace, it's B2B, it can be B2C, it can be in travel, it can be in food, it can be in professional services, it can be in financial services, and it can be in retail. So it can also be peer-to-peer, because there's still platforms that are doing similar things to what eBay started doing many years ago. So I think all those things when it comes to talking about marketplaces, and it's incredibly exciting. I find the marketplace model to be fascinating. Also in terms of problems that are to be solved there for our business customers.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, and I think, as sort of David alluded to in the front, marketplaces, and nowadays, and especially in the fintech industry, we think of them as being very much a sort of like, where you go to find your insurance, where you go to find your funding, where you go to find your, your next microphone or whatever you're going to be buying. But actually, the concept of marketplaces was much further back than that. And marketplaces, the word market, was where everyone used to go buy their food, buy their sustenance and everything else. So given the situation we're in at the moment with COVID-19, obviously that's restricted all those original marketplaces. So maybe just a couple of thoughts from, what do you really think that impact has been? And maybe we'll start again with David, if we could.
Sure. So the physical markets out there selling fruit, vegetables, fish, whatever, they've all shut down. They've all stopped. We're standing in lines outside supermarkets 2 meters away from each other, waiting for a small number of people to trickle through that supermarket each day, or wherever it is you're buying your stuff from. And in the same way, many digital markets have also closed down. So if we look, for example, at the lending markets that are out there, they've really, really frozen up. So, at Funding Options, we're seeing massive demand from small and independent businesses for lending products. And then many of the participants, the traditional participants in the markets, are struggling to actually figure out how to quantify risk, and therefore have pulled back from even participating in those markets. So we see very much with the government's coronavirus interruption scheme, the lending scheme, CBILS, we see a massive interest in that and a very, very small amount of money being lent out to those businesses. So markets have kind of had this group heart attack, and they've all just frozen, and they don't quite know what to do.
Interesting, yeah. Adam, from your perspective, do you see that in the other marketplaces that you sort of specifically service and look to support?
Yeah, so some of the models or kind of marketplace types that we're looking at, are in the food industry. So, if you look at the impact of the virus and the pandemic, some of them I agree completely with David, have completely shut down and are just completely out of commission. But some of them are actually booming. Let's look at one particular example. Let's say the likes of Just Eat or Deliveroo or Uber Eats, right? They have now become this outlet for people that are stuck at home. They need food. They want food delivered to their doorstep. So and now with the physical restaurants completely shutting down, some of them are still open just to serve as the delivery or the takeaway industry. So and that pivot in itself, like if you look at their volumes, the food industry or food delivery marketplaces, they're skyrocketing right now. And you look at other segments as well, and this is correlated very closely to the fact that people are just stuck at home. Video games, right? We all like this in terms of the kind of quirky industries that we're now seeing all of a sudden booming or emerging. Just because people are stuck at home, there's all sorts of digital services in the video games sector that are being completely overloaded with demand right now. Whereas on the retail side, I totally agree. We're seeing less traffic. But one thing to add to that. you know, the B2B marketplaces, the supplier marketplaces in retail that are supplying the small shops, it was quite apparent to me, because, you know, I was obviously, as we all go to a supermarket, get supplies, get some food, in small shops, because they're serviced by marketplaces, they actually ended up having stock for longer than some of the other you know, big players, like the main supermarket chains, potentially as well, that were struggling, and their supply chains were not ready for the sudden shock. The marketplace model prevailed, and those small shopkeepers ended up having stock for days, you know, as the pandemic started, and then well into the pandemic. So it's very interesting to see kind of the dynamics of the market changing with such a major you know, a major event or a major development like this virus. But yeah, that would be my take.
It's kind of interesting, and I would sort of like taking up your sort of final point there with the small retailers, the small shops, still actually having stocks and everything else. Do you think that's a function of, and we're getting into semantics, is that a function of a marketplace, or is that a function of a supply chain? And what would you see as the differentiation between the two?
It is. I think the main difference here was the supply chain of the likes of Sainsbury's or the likes of Tesco is very centralized, and the processes are like, you know, even the brain power managing or administering that supply chain is very concentrated. Whereas with a marketplace, given that, you know, each shopkeeper can have a different marketplace supplying different goods to them, right? And it's essentially free market. You know, they have the freedom of choice to choose the right suppliers for a particular category of goods. That, you know, that fragmentation helped to keep up with demand, basically, and ended up you know, withstanding the pressure and you know, and diluting the shock that came with the pandemic. So I think that is the main difference. It's fascinating, you know, how the supply chain and you know, aspects related to it can impact, you know, something that is a daily problem right now. You know, consumers wanting to get supplies, wanting to get grocery basic essentials. But yeah,
it's kind of interesting. Without going down a complete different direction, you could start talking about, you know, decentralization, blockchain, yeah, we could go down a massive different road there, but I'm going to resist that for now. But it's really interesting to pick up on the key point of that, is that because the you know, the independent retailers had a multitude of suppliers, they were more able to cope. Now, I'm guessing, I'm looking at sort of Stephen now, is that, you know, that is the fundamental principle of a marketplace, and the fundamental principle of Confused.com is having a panel of providers available. So have you seen a similar sort of continual demand with regards to insurance?
Well, I think you're right, Mark, because it's at times like this where having a panel and having choice and giving customers access to choice becomes really important, particularly if supply starts to restrict. As far as our insurance marketplace is concerned, we've seen impacts for insurers, we've seen impacts for customers, and we've seen impacts to ourselves. So taking insurers first, they've experienced some real challenges over the last few weeks, and we've had to work very, very closely with them during this period and stay close to our customers to ensure that we're still offering them the best comparison services. So some examples of that: in the initial period of lockdown, many of the big insurers were struggling to answer their phones. That's had a couple of implications. One of them is it's driving more online only purchases, but it's also driving more calls to us to help, which we're willing to do. And it led us to create a coronavirus hub on confused.com/coronavirus, which is aimed at answering all the important and current questions that consumers have about their insurance, whether it's car insurance or home insurance or others. Things like, if I'm working from home, do I need to update my home insurance? These things that consumers worry about, but they can't get through to their insurers to qualify as and to answer, as many of those businesses have been unable to, you know, relocate 8,000, 15,000 people working in call centers to efficiently doing that remotely. So that's sort of one implication. Another impact has been many of our insurers' sort of pre and post sale processes are still built to work in a physical office. So they're quite hard to replicate digitally now their staff are remote, and that will restrict supply, restrict choice to some consumers. So again, if some consumers aren't being served as well by as many companies, then that's another reason for customers to use a marketplace and still get access to that choice, which of course is really important. So that's insurers. I think on the consumer side, there's confusion. There's been a lot of confusion about what they should do, and their questions, which are referred to our hub. There's change. So we've seen changes like the DVSA providing a 6-month extension on consumers' MOTs. And again, customers have questions around that. Our app offers an MOT reminder service, so demand for that has jumped up. But more than that, I think there's just concern. So consumers and many of our customers are going through quite a stressful time financially. So where we can save the money on essential services, obviously we feel privileged that we can help there. As far as we're concerned, as the kind of marketplace operator, we're fortunate that our business is fully online, and so our team can work remotely. And being a small company of only 250 people, we've been able to move quite quickly to react to these changes and to make sure customers are still getting the right help, the right information, and they're making the right choices. That's why we're here, and so this is an important moment for us.
It's really interesting, as you say, and I think it's interesting that, there's another term which potentially could be used to explain marketplaces, which is called middlemen. Now, middlemen has got some negative connotations to it, but actually having that sort of intermediate buffer between the consumer and the supplier actually gives you a buffer of enabling the communication to be correctly targeted to both sort of markets. As you sort of said there, you actually took on a new role as actually being a sort of repository of information from consumers, from customers, to actually put their questions to somebody that could actually give them some rough, interesting knowledge before then needing to go on to the next level to actually talk to the individual suppliers. I guess I'm going to move over and ask David, is that something similar, that funding options as a sort of a lending marketplace? Did you see the same sort of effect with your lending business as well?
Yeah, so what we've seen is just a massive increase in demand in the same way that Stephen and Adam have been talking about it. We just saw this huge spike in people looking to do comparison and looking to shop around. And if we look at the various initiatives that the Treasury have put in place here, there's been a lot of PR around them, a lot of stuff's been pushed out, and then people have really struggled to actually find out how to go ahead and do this. When you look at CBILS, then the whole way of applying for them has been very confusing for people. There's not been a standardized process. There's not been clear digital journeys, and there's not been really an ability to go out and have a look at what's available on the market. So to give you some data on this, I looked this morning on the British Business Bank's site. They have 48 providers of these CBILS loans for small businesses. Many of those are not operating at the moment. Only a small number of them are actually trading loans, and they're looking, the ones that are on there are working on how they do this. A good example is Starling announced today that they were going on, and they're listed on there. So, we're celebrating that, but they're still working, Starling's still working out how to do this. They're not necessarily ready to actually start going and doing these loans. I was just taking a quick look there to see what the current wording on the sites that are offering these loans are. When I go to the Barclays site and I follow all the links through as somebody who's external, the key information I get from Barclays is please contact your relationship team at Barclays to discuss CBILS. The challenge is the relationship team are all working from home, they're remote, their organization's not in place. So it's very, very hard for those small businesses to navigate this, to figure out what's available, to figure out what a sensible price is for it and a sensible interest rate. So yeah, it's a tough time for small businesses right now.
Yeah, and I think you say, obviously that echoes what we heard from the insurance side of things. Is actually, through you know, say the incumbents, the suppliers, the core suppliers of these products, they're businesses as well, and they're set up for a very straightforward, rule-based application procedure. And obviously in the insurance game, that they're set up to provide insurance, which is their core skill. What they're now needing to do is react massively to the change in circumstances, the change in the landscape. A lot of people liken it to sort of, trying to, turn a juggernaut, and the ability for them to actually change their processes and procedures is quite tricky, which is where we're seeing this sort of small lack of information appear, which I think if we didn't have marketplaces like ours involved, those areas would be a complete catechism and nobody would know what's going on. So it's quite clear how important the marketplace is in the overall sort of industry and the overall supply chain as well. From your point of view, Adam, obviously being on the payments side of things, you get experience of lots and lots of different marketplaces. You alluded to it a little bit earlier. Are there marketplaces which are, absolutely booming and going off the charts, and are they getting to a point where they're not going to be able to deal with the volumes at some point, or do you think it's that they're set up to be able to deal with them?
No, it's and I think when you ask that kind of question, it's important to go back to kind of what do we consider marketplace to be offering? Like, what is the value add of the marketplace? The marketplace, the ultimate goal of a marketplace is to bring buyers to sellers, right? And also enable choice, and also remove that layer of complexity of the buyer finding a seller, right? That's the fundamental bit. So in some of those industries, I was talking about video games, that is booming, right? But travel, for obvious reasons, because it's completely shut down or inactive as an industry as a whole. And marketplaces that operate in that space, like Booking.com, Trivago, Hotels.com, they're seeing no traffic whatsoever. They're at a you could say existential crisis moment right now. Yeah. Whereas in some other cases, just because of this dynamic, people are stuck at home. Anything that can help people relax, spend their time when they're at home in a productive manner. So learning like educational marketplaces, we see streaming marketplaces of videos, content, again, games as well. That is all of a sudden in demand. That is all of a sudden booming. I think they will cope with this. Those businesses, the ones that we're talking about, being on the up right now, they were set up, with tech mentality, and as a first almost principle. So they have infrastructures to be able to cope with the demand, and I think the overall landscape across all the different marketplaces is gonna evolve after the virus, and some of the dynamics are gonna shift towards some of the marketplaces that actually helped during the crisis, that actually provided value, that actually delivered to the end consumer, and I think that's the most important part. But for others, let's face it, they're facing existential crisis, and not much can be done right at this moment with that.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to start taking a couple of questions from the audience, and then I've got a few others of my own to get on there as well. We've had a question saying, do you agree banks and insurers lack automation, creating an opportunity for marketplaces, but also creating many challenges? Now I'm probably going to ask Stephen to comment up first of all with regards to the insurers. As we were sort of saying, we've seen where your role was as a sort of a communication tool. Are they creating you an opportunity, or are they causing you a massive challenge, or both?
So I think there's a few aspects to this. So the first one is, do they lack automation? I think most insurers would say that they've invested a lot in digitizing, certainly the front-end experience with consumers in terms of acquiring customers. I think some of the sort of intra-life processes and back-end processes have probably not been digitized as much. So I would expect most big insurers to be re-looking at digitization transformation programs again, and realizing that perhaps this experience over the past few weeks has highlighted that there's still a lot of work to do there. So I think I'd agree with the kind of the premise of the question. Does it create an opportunity for us? I think one of the impacts we've seen is that there's been a group of consumers that are habitually used to using the phone to buy their insurance products or other similar products. They've been unable to do that in the last few weeks. And so they've been effectively forced to have a purely digital experience. And most of those people will have had a good experience. And what we've seen time and time again is when that happens, they won't go back. So I think there's, phone as a channel was reducing anyway, year on year. But I think in March, our stats say that channel was probably reduced 50% year on year. That's likely to be worse in April. And there's a big group of those consumers, and some of them are older demographics, will be having a good experience, and then they'll stay digital. And so that's an opportunity for us, is to serve those groups better, new arrivals to digital marketplaces, if you like. And so that's something we'll aim to do.
Okay, sounds interesting. David, on the point from the banks, we're talking a little bit about how they can cope with the volumes. Is it giving you challenges and opportunities in equal measure?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the banks, they haven't created a digital journey for any of these initiatives that are in place. And fundamentally, the high street banks themselves are less agile than, for example, the fintechs, the challenger banks, the alternative lenders, etc. They're far more effective of putting these effective digital journeys in place very quickly. So what we're seeing, for example, on our side is, we can move very quickly around the digital journey. We can get things in place. And we're then working around packaging these things up to help take them back to the banks, et cetera, and acting almost like a marketplace front end. But it's still a very, very difficult journey for everybody. And, I'd encourage the watchers and the listeners of this webinar to actually go out there and just take a moment, pick a high street bank or two and have a look at the journey that you go through. Pretend that you're a small business. You'll really understand the experience that they're having right now, and how hard it is, where they're having to sit there and wait on the phone for 3 hours to get through to somebody who can't really help them, who's maybe working from their lounge at home. And it exposes a lot of the business continuity planning that was done, or the lack of business continuity planning out there. The fact that many business continuity plans assumed that it would be some kind of terrorist attack that took the bank offline, and therefore that what they needed was another call center that was located somewhere in Hertfordshire, that they could all, get in Ubers and they could all go to Hertfordshire or like Sussex or wherever. But actually, nobody really planned for, what if we can't have any call centers? How does this work? And many of the banks and many of the large organizations have really been struggling to just get their organizations operating, to be able to route calls properly, to be able to get all these things handled, to be able to deal with the fact that traditionally they were outsourcing a lot of their calls to other countries around the world. If you're outsourcing many of your calls to India, and then all of a sudden India completely goes offline, as many of those call centers have done, and they don't have the infrastructure to work from home, how do you fill those gaps? It's impossible to do. So there's just been a lack of deep thinking around, what does business continuity look like? How do you deal with a pandemic? How do you create a culture and an environment where you can be both safe and also agile in terms of putting those journeys in place? So yeah, it's a tough situation that everybody's in right now.
Really interesting. Adam, on your side of things, in the same sort of vein, obviously there's been a lot of opportunity created for marketplaces. Have you seen new marketplaces come on board, or have you seen existing, marketplaces starting to want to add a payment or a financial solution to their marketplaces?
Yeah, it's the professional services one is very interesting, because all of a sudden, you know, you can't go to a barber or you can't call for a plumber because you're you know, you're afraid that they might have the virus, and things just happen, right? You know, your boiler just blows up. You may need to fix something at your house. So those things need to continue somehow, right? So what I've seen is some of the professional services, in particular marketplaces, coming up with measures that are, you know, trying to adapt to the requirements and you know, the harsh conditions that we currently finding ourselves in, and also trying to provide that service, but within the kind of realm of controlling the situation and protecting their customers and protecting the members of the marketplace. So that has created some interesting opportunities in the payment journey, because a lot of those marketplaces, you know, professional services, even the food ones that, again, as I was saying earlier, all of a sudden are the food delivery marketplaces are booming, has created some efficiency gaps in terms of how they handle their payments, in particular payouts to the actual businesses that are delivering the service, and that's where we, as OpenPaid or as a payment facilitator, we see you know, we see an opportunity to automate some of those journeys, because a lot of them are manual. You know, a lot of them are, if you pop up the hood, look at what actually the treasury or finance people are doing in those marketplace operators, you know, they're working off of CSV files, Excel spreadsheets, you know, pulling very large files together, and then sending a lot of money and channeling it to their marketplace members. This is where, you know, a player like us, you know, like OpenPaid, can help automate things, you know, with the introduction of API first interfaces and this automation layer that takes away that heavy lifting or manual labor potentially. So with the demand, we've seen, you know, more strain on the value chain on the payment side as well, which is where you know, we believe we can come in and solve a problem.
Okay. So it's obvious that, you know, this current situation has introduced interesting opportunities, interesting challenges. So what's the future going to be like? I think one of the most interesting questions that I've always thought of is that, is this going to be business as usual afterwards? You know, and I say the word afterwards, assuming that there is a finish, a stop, or is this the new normal? Is another big word that everyone's talking about. So just for the, you know, the final sort of like 5-10 minutes, let's have a think about, you know, what will the new normal be? What's the role going to be in the future? And maybe we could ask Stephen, maybe for your comments first of all.
Sure. So I think in general, long term, the future looks still very positive for marketplaces. I think we've seen, we still feel that we're near the start of the journey for marketplaces, and we've seen numerous new ones launch and be successful. We've launched some of our own in other countries beyond the UK as other financial services markets start to mature around the world. So we still very much believe in them. And I think beyond our own industry, we've seen other areas where marketplaces have launched and been successful. eBay did secondhand clothes, but Depop is doing a really good job of operating in that niche. Airbnb is a good example. Reverb is doing it for instruments. So I think the kind of success stories keep coming. Recognize there are some challenges for some of those at the moment. I think in terms of digital marketplaces in our industry, I think I'd agree with what Adam said earlier, that you know, the primary goal is to match buyers and sellers. But I think that's a marketplace. But I'm sure Adam would agree that great marketplaces do more than that. They add more than that, more value to both the buyers and the sellers, to both sides of the marketplace. So in our industry, how do we do that? I think a lot of it for us is about going beyond price. So historically, it was very much a price-driven experience for customers. But increasingly, we're doing much more than price. We're letting customers filter on their needs, their choices, and price is one of the factors. It is a key factor, but it is not the only factor in their choice. So that's a key thing for us. And actually, the last few weeks have really showed that it's not all about price. It's also about what's included. What are you covered for? What do you really want to use your car or your home for? And have you got the right cover? So I think that's really shone a light on that need, and that's a need that is going to be very important. One of the big enablers for that is going to be data, and there's been an explosion in data, and there's also an unstoppable wave of giving consumers agency over their data to make these things possible and to make hyper-personalization possible. So we think those two things come together. Fundamentally though, we still believe that a consumer needs a champion. They need someone working on their behalf, sitting between them and hundreds of financial services providers to ensure they get not just the right choice, but also the right choice at the best price and the best value for them.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's right. David, maybe some comments from you.
Sure.
Will lightning strike twice is one of the interesting things I think of. Is that when the pandemic, will your continuity plan now always have a pandemic planning element in it?
Yeah, the U-shaped versus the W-shaped recession that's going to come beyond this. So look, I mean, we're not going back to the old normal. That's not going to happen. Anyone, you know, we see lots of commentary out there right now saying, yeah, this is just going to snap right back and it's going to be as it was. And the stock market's going to be at the same levels and everyone's going to be just as affluent. There's been a lot of destruction. We know that there's going to be a lot of scarring after this. There is this question about, will this have multiple waves to it? So will this be, you know, just a U-shaped recession that comes along afterwards, or W-shaped? But a couple of kind of key points I wanted to pull out was maybe slightly more optimistic ones, more hopeful ones. For many years, we've been trying to get businesses to transform digitally. You know, how many webinars have you sat through where you've spoken about digital transformation and trying to get businesses to transform, and how do we do this? The pandemic has transformed businesses. Everyone now is a digital business. Everyone is working from home, or they're not working at all. You know, so there's been this like massive change, and coronavirus has done something that all of the CEOs, CIOs, chief transformation officers, etc., have failed to do. It's forced people to just say, screw it, we're just going to do this. It's going to happen. And what's happened is we're now seeing, and we were speaking about the, you know, lending from the high street banks and how they're struggling with that. They're not as agile, can't get these things in place. That will change their culture. The realization of it will change their culture. I think one of the other kind of big transformations will be, there was a view that the world was very small and that distances were not very far, and that it was fine to have all of your call centers in a very remote location, and, you know, to have your PPE manufactured somewhere in China or the Philippines and then transported back to you. I think there's a lot of onshoring of both physical items and services as well. So that globalization steps back a little. And people start to think about, okay, if this could happen once and we're looking at our planning, then what's our planning for our call centers moving forward? How do they work? And my final kind of optimistic point about this is, I think there's a fundamental change in the nature of work. And, you know, again, I'm sure you've been in many future of work kind of discussions and webinars and conferences, etc. The future of work just kind of came and hit us in the face. The future of work is, we're all sat at home, you know, with glorious backgrounds behind us. And I particularly love your Future 50 kind of poster there and kind of all the good stuff behind you. That future of work is with us now. It's brought it kind of kicking and screaming, and we're struggling with it, but it's working. People are still moving forward. People are still trading. Yeah, it's going to be rough, but actually the future of work is here now, and we need to figure out how we take that forward.
Yeah, very, very salient points, I think. Adam, your sort of thoughts on business as usual?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what David just said, and I just wanted to expand on that one actually. Digital transformation, or transformation of kind of traditional businesses like brick and mortars, that is all of a sudden, you know, center stage just because of what's happening, and there's no more excuses. You kind of need to be nimble. You need to be agile. You need to be able to pivot quickly. You need to be able to adjust the way you work. You can't expect to be working the way you did for the last 20 years, right? And just continuing business as usual. That's not going to happen. So if what this virus did is just highlighted the gap, and those evangelists that have been pushing for digital transformation, for data, like Stephen was saying earlier, and this hyper personalization to deliver more to the consumer, to empower them more, give them more choice, and understand what they're doing. Right, all of a sudden, this is gonna become the new norm. Okay, everyone that is not adjusting themselves to comply with the norm is going to fail, or is just going to struggle massively. So I think it's a wake-up call as well. And marketplaces, that, like, just to bring it back to marketplaces specifically, marketplaces, remember, they're the layer on top, right? They're the value add on top, and they have been designed, or at least you look at eBay, the first digital marketplace, with tech mindset, like as the first thing, as the guiding principle. So those businesses are now gonna have the voice, and are gonna be driving the change that is underneath in the value chains that they aggregate, that they are the middlemen for. They're gonna advocate, gonna be the main advocates of change towards more digital ways of working, towards data, towards broader choice. Globalization, throw it in there as well, and becoming wider in terms of the markets they service. So I think on the positive side, I think this has just accelerated something that was bound to happen. So even in banking, I'm almost expecting, as the payments geek here in residence, I'm expecting open banking to all of a sudden find its killer use case, or find its purpose. I'm expecting some of the banks to finally wake up and say, okay, we need to modernize this core banking system that is just taking hours to process payments, right? Because it's just not scalable anymore in this digital economy, or API economy, that we're now finding ourselves in. So I think I think it can act as an accelerator of sorts to the digital transformation, data, and some of the new technologies that we've been pondering or thinking about may all of a sudden resurface. So yeah, I would stay positive, actually.
Yeah, I think that's the only way to be, is to stay positive. We're kind of coming towards the end of our allotted time now. We've just actually had one really interesting question that has come in, which is, what do we think the role of marketplaces will be in helping the vulnerable and most impacted customers get back to some form of normal? And I was going to ask each of you to sort of do a final thought. Maybe you could sort of respond to that in your sort of final thoughts as we go from there. Maybe Stephen, if you could go first.
Thanks, Mark. Hopefully we can play an important role. I think by the nature of a marketplace, if you're enabling choice, and you're enabling access, and you're enabling competition, then hopefully by nature you are reaching lots of different people and giving access to lots of different people for that. One of the things we're quite focused on is reducing confusion and giving people clarity. And so that's an area we're working quite hard on. I mentioned the kind of information hub earlier on in the show, and generally we're providing a lot of support via our customer services to people who have important questions that there aren't easy answers to, and they can't get those answers from their insurers, and they're worried about it. And so we're working very hard on that. And I think that's an area where, if consumers are informed and they are shopping around and getting choice, and that is made available to the broadest set of people possible, then that definitely helps. So we're not going to rest there. I'm sure that there's always more we can do, but that's where a lot of our focus is going right now.
Absolutely. And David?
So to me, marketplaces do two things. The first thing is they bring buyers and sellers together, as we've already discussed at length, and allow buyers to figure out the best price and the best thing for them to consume. They do another thing as well. They allow a dialogue, they allow education, they allow growth. And I think the thing that marketplaces will do as we move forward, though, the vision that I would paint would be, as well as providing access to the right things, the right services, the right physical goods, they also provide a community, the ability to grow, the ability to learn. So to me, that growth mindset, that community, that support, that's what marketplaces are going to bring more than anything. It's going to be, you know, this will be the channel to pick everybody up and to allow them to move forward and get back trading, get back working, and really figure out what this new normal looks like for all of those businesses, all of the people who've been impacted, etc. So that would be my hope, that actually the growth agenda becomes kind of core to all marketplaces.
Excellent. And your final thoughts, Adam?
Yeah, also on that, actually, there's a very good point. Community is key, and marketplaces enable that. So those kind of things, like, you know, vulnerable people not getting the services that they need, you know, the essential services. Given that, you know, marketplaces are facilitators. It's also, you know, and this community aspect, so it gives a platform for people to talk, to raise those issues, you know, forums potentially, and marketplaces need to listen to not just the you know, and not just in pursuit of profit or to, you know, to make money out of it, but also as a almost like a community service or a social mission, to bring people together and really highlight those problems that are present in local communities, but maybe wider communities as well. So, you know, case in point, those suppliers that I was talking about to small shopkeepers, they all came together. I think there was a conference 2 weeks ago on how to best coordinate efforts to make sure that because on at least on the grocery side, the big supermarket chains were leading the way in a way for, you know, setting up hours for vulnerable and kind of elderly people to do their shopping as well. So I think I heard that a community of marketplaces or suppliers to small shops, you know, grocery shops and corner stores, as we call them, also came together and started discussing how we can help, you know, how we can alleviate some of the pressure, and also how we can help the shopkeepers cope with demand and keep them running. So I've also seen, just to finish off, I've also seen a couple of initiatives that are bringing it back to the consumers, and sort of asking, can you help this shopkeeper that is literally down the street from you by potentially fronting some of the money that you'd pay them for their services by ways of vouchers or you know, some kind of a gift card model prepayment, so that they have the working capital to allow them to continue trading. Like this is, you know, I got an idea from this. Marketplaces, or at least the ones that are supplying those shops, could very well step in here and kind of get involved in that model of asking the consumers, hey, there's someone that, you know, he lives right next to you, or, you know, quite close to you, and they were providing you with services for years. Can you help them survive this, right? And marketplaces can bring that message to consumers, call them to action, and call them to commit to the business that they want, you know, to survive this crisis, and they're loyal to. So I think the community aspect is really, really important in all this, and marketplaces can very well be the facilitators going forward in that process.
Excellent. I think that's, you know, it's been a really interesting discussion. I think, you know, looking through the role of the marketplaces and how they've affected things has been really amazing. I think we can all unanimously seem to agree that, you know, there will be a new normal. We don't quite know what the new normal will be yet, but we're pretty confident that marketplaces are going to have a key role to play in it. And also the advantage, you know, as my grandmother always said to me, every cloud has a silver lining. And so although the pandemic has had a absolutely horrendously terrible effect on many people's lives, one thing that it may have given us is actually the true birth of digital and digital marketplaces. And it will push us as an industry and as a global economy forward, I think, in that. So I really want to thank very much to our audience for joining us and for some really interesting questions. Thank you very much to my panelists. We'd love for everyone to carry on the conversations and the comments using the hashtag Fintech Times Marketplaces, and obviously following us at the Fintech Times. But for now, I want to say thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you very much for joining. Thank you.